We're the beautiful, we're the only Ghostbusters.
The wait is over.
Happy New Year.
And the fun's about to begin.
Are we all going mad?
Yeah. The Ghostbusters are back.
It's slime time. Two in the box.
Ready to go.
We be fast and
They be slow.
Ghostbusters 2.
we're back.
An Ivan Reitman film rated PG. Opens Friday at theaters everywhere.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Not Content Podcast. My name is Jerome Cuson. As always, you can find me on BlueSky at Jerome C 1985. Here tonight on the episode, we are going to be discussing Ghostbusters 2, a late addition to this anniversary year. My co-host, as always, is Brian. He is not on BlueSky yet, but we are going to get him there soon enough. And of course, we are in the month of December. For most of 2024, we've been celebrating important anniversaries. Today, we are quote-unquote celebrating the 35th anniversary of Ghostbusters 2. We did not discuss Ghostbusters 1, even though it's the 40th anniversary, but I'm sure we'll get into our thoughts on the first movie. Originally, we were going to do the 1994 top 10 this week, but I decided that we should take a little bit more time to get some more movies in there. So that will be our final episode of 2024, is the top 10 of 1994. I think that's a fitting way to end it. We're going to talk about what we're doing next week, a little bit later on in the show, because I'm very excited for that, for what we have coming next week. But Brian, this is your idea, so I want you to defend Ghostbusters 2.
Okay, well, this is an unofficial, I guess it is an official episode of Underrated Sequels. By the end of this episode, we're going to have our debate and our final score on whether or not it's underrated or not. I think Jerome is pretty much settled on his side of the argument, but I'm gonna argue as much as I can, because, God damn it, I have a love for this movie. It's a 7 out of 10 for me, but honestly, it's like a super fun movie where it's like all your favorite characters come together from the first one, and just, they're having a good time, except for Bill Murray. I guess he's collecting a paycheck, but he's still like a good time in the movie. So I don't know. I saw the first. I didn't see the first movie first. I saw the second movie first on TV, and after that, I rented the first one. So that's where my perspective is. I think that's probably why I have a nostalgic love for this movie, because in my mind, when I was a kid, this was the first movie. You know what I'm saying? And but just the idea of the ooze coming from the ground and the underwater, or the river of ooze under the city, and all these different things about the movie is just so memorable for me as a kid. The baby being taken away with that little hint of Wizard of Oz music they played a little tribute to in there as well. So there's all these things going on in this movie. Yes, people hate it. Growing up, I thought people loved it like I did, but apparently I was in my own little world, man, because I guess I'm one of the few. I wouldn't say one of the few, but I'm one of the 30 to 40% of the people that's seen this movie that really dig and appreciate this movie. I would say the other 60% have a strong dislike for this movie that I never realized existed until recently, and it was kind of a shock for me. And I was like, are we talking about Ghostbusters 2? We're talking about the same movie? So, yeah, I don't know. The script is fine. Like, it's got the same beats as the first one. And I think some elements of this movie are even scarier than the first one. Like that thing with the mink coat and those little mink dead animals coming alive again, which freaked me out as a kid. I think that scene freaked me out more so than some of the scenes in Ghostbusters 1 where, Dana gets, taken and possessed. I would argue some of the scenes in this one are even, scarier, considering the situations. And I would say, well, it's hard to tell because I watched the TV version. I'll get into that in a second. But I would say the visual effects were up to par and up to the standard for the time of '89, doing a little bit better than the first movie. The only thing I would have kind of changed a little bit is, instead of Cheech Marin having a cameo, give the guy a full role. But other than that, it seems like Ernie Hudson got lost in the middle of this movie. They didn't put him in the, I don't know. He was missing for 40 minutes for some reason.
A crime against humanity. I mean, just that poor guy just can't get a
But
break.
that's why they gave him so much more dialogue in the latest one. So I think by Ghostbusters Frozen,
justice finally served. Here's what I'll say. This is the best movie. This is the best movie that Kurt Fuller was in 1989. That's what I'll say.
True dat, because this is definitely better than No Holds Barred for sure. And listen, this came out a week before Batman '89. So that tells you that this was going to be not a struggle, but like they wanted to get ahead of the Batman '89 mania 1 week ahead of time just to get that money. It still made money. Like this still made a lot of money, but I guess just the general buzz about it wasn't so great. The cast members weren't so high about making it, but everyone was just taking their paychecks. If you look at the research, everyone was just arguing for that little bit more. They just told the studio, Columbia Pictures, if you really want a Ghostbusters 2, we'll do it, but you got to pay us the money. And that was the whole 5 year struggle. It seems like they were just reluctant to make it. And
Wow, I mean, clearly Bill Murray wanted money. That is incredibly obvious to anybody watching this movie because I mean, Bill Murray clearly had his demandments. You know, he didn't want to wear the proton pack for a good portion of the movie, so he is very much off to the side, and I think it shows. I think it really shows the lack of effort that went into this movie. This feels like a cash grab, and I don't think this movie is completely without merit. I do think there are some fun moments, but I think the fundamental problem for me has always been this feels like the first movie except lesser than, and I can't escape that feeling in watching this. And you know, there is an entire graveyard of comedy sequels. You look at Airplane 2, you look at so many other movies, Caddyshack 2, the Hangover sequels. Like there is a graveyard of
Cannonball Run
awful.
2.
The thing is that when you do a comedy sequel, it is very, very hard to capture the energy of the first movie all over again. And unfortunately, what you have in this situation is you have a movie that is, again, feels so much lesser than. I'm going to get into my theory why I think the Ghostbusters sequels in general just haven't worked. I'll get into that a little bit later. But specifically, I think that this movie doesn't work because it is lesser than the first one. How I think of this movie is, you know, when you think about the first movie, it has a little bit of grit to it. It feels much more like this movie, I think, is trying to be New York centric, but I don't think it's nearly as organic and successful. Like they are so much into the negativity and the hatred of like the way that New Yorkers are behaving that it, but the problem is it feels like a cartoon. And I think it very much connects with what happened to the Ghostbusters after 1984. It literally became a cartoon, and I think that has an effect on what this movie is, because I think the performances are much broader. I think the movie overall just feels very much like it is trying too hard to be a good sequel instead of just being a good sequel. And I just think that everybody is kind of all over the place. I think the two most consistent performances for me are Harold Ramis and Ernie Hudson. I think they're very much in line with what they did in the first movie. But the problem is that Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd are kind of the centerpieces in so many ways, and it doesn't feel like they're nearly as good this time around as compared to the first. And you know, Sigourney Weaver is basically like in the first movie, she doesn't have very much agency, but she has. It feels like even less agency in the second movie, and it sucks. It really sucks that you have this badass character. Like we're talking Ripley from Alien and Aliens, and like to me, it would have been so much cooler if she became a Ghostbuster. I mean, again, it's Sigourney Weaver, and I don't know, man. Like that for me, I really get stuck on that. It just feels like they pressed the reset button, and everybody is kind of where they were before the first movie started, and like you bring back all the characters, you bring back Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver, and it just feels like a rehash of the first one, except there's a baby. And I'm sorry, this movie did not need a baby. And I get what they were trying to go for with the evil character in the painting, but I don't know, man. Like this movie, I just think doesn't work in so many ways. That doesn't mean there aren't entertaining moments. I would agree with you that there are a couple of moments that are fun, but it is way too inconsistent. And to me, the way that I think of this movie, the way that I kind of relate this movie is if you look at the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies, you look at that first one, it's gritty, it's very much it feels very much like an independent, it feels like an independent movie that kind of organically builds the characters and makes the characters feel important and cool. And I think the first Ghostbusters did that for and funny enough, it's 4 and 4. But Ninja Turtles 2 was very much a kids movie. coming after a cartoon had already come out, and it feels like this is following that same pattern in that you have a cartoon, so this movie somehow feels obligated to be a cartoon.
I totally understand that point because the cartoon is not necessarily even family oriented. It's actually much more teen oriented because they go really heavy on some of the
I
supernatural
mean,
stuff in
some of
the
the
show.
episodes of the cartoon are really good. Like, let's be clear. When I say it's a cartoon, I'm not necessarily saying that to say that in a degrading way. I think some of the episodes of the real Ghostbusters are really good.
For sure, and I think it still maintains that edge that you speak of. The second movie just feels like, a reunion, like a family reunion type, setup. All the characters are back. It's just all about having fun. They don't take it too seriously. It's, a rehash basically of the same sort of plot, end of the world type plot. No one believes us until they have to call the Ghostbusters like 2/3 into the movie. So it's the same beats. And they added a baby, and I know that really infuriates a lot of people. But I get why they did it. It's a family thing. They wanted more of that family dollar, and instead of more of that teen, I guess more of the teen dollar than the family. So they wanted more family stuff in this. I get it. I mean, listen, the soundtrack. I love. People don't love Bobby Brown. I love his music. I don't like the person, but On Our Own is a fucking banger, man, and it's such a classic. And I always remember that, nostalgically with this movie as well, the same way that you associate with the original Ghostbusters team with the first movie. So again, they're trying to recreate those similar beats, right? Which is fine. Like I say, the Ghostbusters, the first one is like a classic 8.5 out of 10. This is like a 7 out of 10, but a fun 7 out of 10 for me. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know you haven't seen Tremors 2 yet, but if you kind of see Tremors 2 and Tremors 1, you can kind of see some relatable stuff in that as well. The same kind of stuff you're complaining about when it comes to sequels and not measuring up to the original and trying to do other things and trying to, um, appreciate or just trying to like meet their maker in terms of like other, bosses that they have and stuff. But this is like a different situation where I don't know. It just took 5 years to put together, and I think it shows in like the casting and the production. But I appreciate it for what it is, and considering that this was filmed during the strike, right? Because the strike was '88, so they obviously had trouble with production in '88 trying to get this
And
out
that's
in
a huge.
'89.
I mean, if that is the case, then that probably explains a lot of the issues because you're not supposed to change any lines from the script, which I don't know if they were necessarily following the rules, but I mean that certainly may have contributed because I think any movie that is filmed during a writer's strike is compromised, and I think that is borne out in 2024 as well.
Yeah, and they said, according to some of the notes, they had a lot of it written in '87, and then a lot of rewrites were to come after that as well. But of course, you can't do anything during the writer's strike. This is scheduled to come out at a certain date just to compete with Batman. So there are some things that kind of have go against it. But I think in the end, for my taste, like it did what it was supposed to do. Right? I don't think this movie was made to win any awards or blow people away.
I mean,
Yes,
I
it's
don't
a cash
necessarily think
cow.
the first one was either, but I think that movie had a far greater sense of itself in terms of the comedy and being specific and really going out of its way to be something that is both funny but also a little bit scary, a little bit adult. I mean, there's a blowjob joke in the first Ghostbusters, and I'm not saying that automatically makes the movie better, but I think it has a greater sense of play than the second one because, like, again, I think the second one is being very is much broader than the first one, and I think that is where the problem lies. And I would say the same thing about like people complain about WWE going TVPG. Like that is not the problem. The problem is that they are so broad that they're not actually appealing to any specific audience, and that's the problem. And I think this movie has kind of a similar problem that it is too broad, and that is my overarching complaint. I probably said it too much, but for me, I think that is fundamentally where this movie comes up short because I think there is potential. Like to me, I've always seen, and I think a lot of it is because of the cartoon. Like there is a ton of potential in a Ghostbusters franchise, but I just don't think that they've ever fully realized it for one reason or another. And part of it is the lack of motivation on some of the people in the movie themselves. Some of it has been, issues with casting and trying to bring in the right cast. But I think there is potential for this franchise, and anytime I've ever gone into a Ghostbusters movie, I've wanted it to be good because I have such a love for the first one. But I just think every sequel has just been disappointing, and they've been disappointing for different reasons. Like, I know that people kind of want to throw them all in the same basket of being just bad, but what I think actually makes it more interesting is that each sequel fails for a completely different reason than the previous one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I did find the 2021 Afterlife that we had our disagreements about nostalgia and the power of nostalgia, and that
I mean, I think the computer generated Harold Ramis is genuinely one of the most offensive things that I've seen in a movie theater this decade. I mean, I think it's gross.
I was in tears. So I guess that tells you the spectrums of where me and Jerome were at in terms of that sequel. But I felt it built up to that, and it was all about this idea of paying tribute to him and maybe kind of reconciliating some of those loose.
I mean, look, I would rather
the
Jason
relationships.
Reitman and Bill Murray have just gone to therapy instead of doing this. Like, I think that would have been just much healthier for everybody because clearly Jason Reitman was going through some shit with his dad, and Bill Murray obviously has guilt because he stopped talking to Harold Ramis during production of Groundhog Day. And again, this is something like resolve your stuff when these people are alive, and don't put your neuroses on the screen. That's why it was just really gross to me.
I see what your point is. It's just kind of
I mean,
like amazing.
I like the idea of the. I actually did like the idea of just rebooting it, and I love the idea of like this family of Ghostbusters. But yeah, I think we could just kind of get into the sequels. Do we have anything else to say about Ghostbusters 2?
Well, I wanted to point out some interesting notes that I picked up on.
Okay, you go ahead. I've been very
Just some
negative,
weird trivia.
I'm going to let you.
Trivia.
I will give you the floor here.
Okay, so in the beginning of the movie, when Bill Murray, Peter Venkman is having a psychic show, the woman goes, she predicts that the world's going to end on February 14, 2016. Now, what came out in 2016, Jerome?
The female Ghostbusters movie, which we will, I'm sure, elaborate a little bit of our thoughts on in a few minutes.
Okay, so my initial thinking was, how did I miss this the first 10, 20 times I've seen this movie? And then I started to realize maybe like unintentionally the writers in 2016 looked back on that line and said, hey, let's produce the movie for 2016. And then now we have this Ghostbusters multiverse that kind of does make sense because the other actors appear in the 2016 Ghostbusters as other people. So if you want to go by the multiverse rules, yeah, so I think there's some weird shit going on there when they predicted that the sequel or the remake would come out in 2016. Kind of spooky there, but it obviously didn't come out on Valentine's Day. But the whole all-female thing was not very well received. But I think that was just kind of like, I don't know, some sexist bullshit going on there because I did find elements of that movie funny. Just like I think the overall plot and structure of the script was what held it back, but I did like some of the casting. I liked it for what it was.
I think the biggest problem with the female Ghostbusters movie is they were trying to cast the women like they were just taking over the roles of the men, and I think you just have to go with the 4 funniest women, and it feels like Bridesmaids putting those performers as the Ghostbusters, but seemingly trying to maintain the overall, like, okay, this person is this, like, one of the female Ghostbusters is going to be Egon, or one of the female Ghostbusters is going to be Venkman. I mean, I think that's where the execution of that movie falters. And I also think that creating a Ghostbusters movie, the comedic stylings of the Ghostbusters movie are incredibly well scripted and written. And the way the comedy is, the way modern comedies are directed now, doesn't really work because it's so much about improv. And again, there's no doubt that I'm sure some of Ghostbusters was improv, but that movie is written extremely well and extremely tight. And I just can't imagine a modern Ghostbusters movie being able to capture the same energy as the 1984. And I think you almost have to go in a completely different direction, which I think these 2 most recent movies have kind of tried to do, but again, I think the wallowing in nostalgia is what has really held them back. I think the female Ghostbusters movie, in terms of the sequels, is probably my favorite of the 4. But that is not a compliment. I mean, I think like I would give that movie a 6 out of 10, and I would give Ghostbusters 2 like a 5 out of 10. I would give the nostalgia run like a solid 4, like probably a 5 out of 10 as well, and Frozen Empire is like a 3 out of 10 because that's and and again I think each one has kind of failed for different reasons, and I think the problem with Frozen Empire is introducing a female ghost and teasing a romance with Egon's granddaughter. That is one of the dumbest things that I've ever seen because that movie, like, you could do that plot in a movie and it might be good. If you're doing it in a Ghostbusters movie, is really stupid.
Yeah, I see your points on those. Like, I'm kind of more favorable to the remakes, or not remakes, to the sequels than I am the remake. The remake does have its moments as well. I think that was the first time I think we saw Chris Hemsworth actually try to be funny, and that probably had some influence on the Thor Marvel franchise. So I got it. You got to. I mean, I can see the connection easily. Yeah, and you could tell he was having fun, and I think that was like the big change, obviously, that Thor needed. So in that case, that movie actually did some good for a different reason for a different franchise. But the idea that they were just basing them off the original instead of letting them be their own characters, I think that's what really held them back. Because I think in this case we still get, like, in the sequels with the kids and stuff, they're their own personalities. They're a mix of like the grandchildren mixed with like modern sensibilities, mixed with that Stranger Things kind of twinge, obviously, with the casting. But I think we all try to have this. We basically, what I think is, we put Ghostbusters high on this pedestal, and a lot of us are just never gonna ever find anything to compare it to. And so I don't know. I think automatically, whenever there's a Ghostbusters sequel, there's always gonna be this negative view going into it, and I'm trying to like go above that and try to stay positive whenever there's like a Ghostbusters sequel or remake or whatever they want to do, because I know people are automatically going to shit on it no matter what. But in my mind, I'm like always positive.
Basis in general, I think every time Star Wars comes out, there's an entire YouTube industry that's just going to shit on it, and I think this is a huge problem. And I don't know how you solve this problem. I think these studios just need to start ignoring and start repudiating these people more fully, because the YouTube industry is thriving on this negativity, and I think that's a huge problem. I think that is, especially with Star Wars, fundamentally, I think it's a huge issue. And again, I don't know that the female Ghostbusters movie was great, but I think the problem is that it became such a talking point in 2016 that it kind of broke any idea. So that's why you had to go back the nostalgic route. And look, I think the movie after that certainly did very well, but I think the biggest problem is that that sequel, the Frozen Empire, definitely did not do as well in terms of box office. So, I mean, we'll see what happens in the future. Like, it did make enough to where it is going to like have another. I'm assuming it's going to have another movie, but I'm very curious to see how the next one does, because like, clearly when they came back after Harold Ramis's death, like, they were able to find a lot of success. But like, what's going to happen when they make another movie? Is the third one going to be as successful, especially because the old cast is not going to be in the next one? But I think each movie has kind of been a disaster for a different reason. I think Ghostbusters 2, it's a repeat of the first one, and I don't think that there's as much energy in going into it from the cast. The female Ghostbusters movie, just a lot of general toxicity around the movie, and again, it's like you're just taking the cast of Bridesmaids and just shoehorning them into these roles. And again, I think that just creating a new team would have been so much better, as opposed to trying to just match them up seemingly with the previous characters. I think that what makes the Ghostbusters franchise so frustrating is that there have been some interesting ideas with the real Ghostbusters and then the extreme Ghostbusters, but it's kind of like on the big screen they really haven't had the temerity to go and do something new necessarily. I think Afterlife. I mean, again, it's all about that nostalgia. I think there are moments in Afterlife, like I think when they the big drive, the big chase of the ghosts when they're in Oklahoma, the big car chase. I think that's a really great scene, and it's one of the coolest things because you couldn't really do that in New York City, so you're kind of taking advantage of the small town atmosphere. And I think Frozen Empire was just too plot heavy, and I think that has generally been a problem with a lot of movies, especially the reboots and the sequel reboots and all that. Way too much plot. I feel about Frozen Empire kind of like how I do about the new Beetlejuice. Just a lot of plot, and it feels like there's some really good ideas, but the problem is that both of those movies probably needed a female director to really get the movie to actually be good.
See, the other criticism I have with these, like, and I'm the positive one, but this thing about tone is like whether or not we want this to be a horror movie or do we want this to be a comedy? Because that's where like the first one finds that balance, right? So in my head, every time they announced one of these like sequels or whatever, it was cool they had Jason Reitman the first time, but I was like thinking like I think you should hand this over to Edgar Wright because he's one of the few people that understands that balance. And he hasn't really done any horror comedy lately, but obviously earlier in his career, Shaun of the Dead, is like a perfect example. I think Shaun of the Dead is like the 2000s version of like the Ghostbusters, like in terms of that audience that found the movie. It was more of like a cult following on DVD, obviously, but still, like they found the movie and it was this comedy and it was this horror, and they combined all these elements, and then it feels very similar to that Ghostbusters feel in terms of that edginess you're talking about. So I keep thinking like, why are we not putting Edgar Wright into this position of like either executive producer role if he wants to take over fully directing? Is he just into his own projects? I don't know, but I just feel like there's
There's don't know
people
how
out there that find
interested
that tone.
he is in a franchise. Like, is he going to be the one to do a franchise? Like, he is doing a remake of The Running Man, which we'll see how that goes. But I just don't know how interested he is in investing, especially after his experiences with Ant-Man. Like, it's one thing to do a remake of The Running Man, which is just its own thing, but is he going to step into a franchise? I don't buy that he's ever going to do that.
Yeah, or maybe Ghostbusters UK or something like that. Expand. Why is it always New York? That's the other thing too. It's like why is
that's what I mean. I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about is why do they keep going to New York? And I think it would be really interesting to try another space. I mean, again, like Frozen Empire, like of course they have to bring Walter Peck back, and he's the mayor, and it's just, I was expecting to actually like Frozen Empire because the trailer made it seem like it was going to be something different. But to me, it falls into the same trap that all the other Ghostbusters sequels have fallen into, in that all of the Ghostbusters sequels have either broken up the team or brought the team together or brought the team back together. And it's just like, can we get a Ghostbusters movie where they are Ghostbusters from beginning to end and just have them do something as a team? I don't understand why we have never gotten a Ghostbusters sequel that is that. Like, the drama does not have to come from bringing everybody back together or putting the team together. Like, just have them start out as Ghostbusters and then go from there. Like, I think if they had done that with the female Ghostbusters, again, there's still other problems, but I think that would have been so much better. If you just had them as a team from the start, at least it would have been something different.
Imagine if they made Cheech Marin a Ghostbuster in '89. I think that would have been incredibly awesome. No balls though. No, they didn't have the balls to do it. But the way you're explaining it, it's almost as if you want the Avengers Age of Ultron type opening with Ghostbusters and just launch the movie right off the bat with them just like destroying ghosts left and right and trapping them. And because if you notice, each movie opens with this slow like ghost thing, right? And it always opens on some slow thing, and then it becomes this event, and then that's the event that calls the Ghostbusters. But what if you just open it up with them kicking ass? So I get that tone, and
that's what I thought Frozen Empire was going to be, and they were going in that direction. But then they had to put drama by saying that Egon's granddaughter could no longer be like. It was really stupid. I really, really hated that movie, and that's part of the reason why. It's like, okay, of course we're going to have the young female Ghostbuster not be a Ghostbuster. It's like, I remember when Kick-Ass 2 did this, and that movie also really sucked. So it was just really annoying, and like again, Frozen Empire, I think had a lot of potential because it felt like it could have separated itself, but it did not. And K.K. Simmons is in the movie for like a minute, and I mean, it just feels like there were a lot of weird editing choices that got made, and it feels like they did some things to that movie in the editing room that probably changed it significantly. And I don't know what to make of those changes and how it ultimately turned out, but I was not ultimately happy with that sequel. But like to me, I don't know. I don't know that I have any excitement level for any future movies because I think that again these four have just kind of been disasters. So unless the reviews for the next one are really really good, I don't even know that I'm going to see it in theaters.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, that's tough. That's a tough choice there, but because every time Ghostbusters does come out in theaters, it is to me like an event for me, and I know it's not an event for other people, but it's like a personal event for me because it just draws me back to watching that for the first time. I think it was on KCAL 9 in 1993, that first Ghostbusters 2 experience. So, yeah, I don't know, man. And and like I said, it's a different experience when you watch the sequel before you watch the original. We were having this other conversation through text, me and Jerome, and like we come from a generation where well, I guess what Terminator 2 is one where we saw the sequel before both of us, the original, right? What other?
Before things were on demand. I mean, I
Yeah,
think are kids watching sequels before the originals now because they have access to everything? How many kids are sitting down and watching cable channels and like they run into Back to the Future 2 on TV and
that's
they just
exactly what happened to me, and I ended up watching Back to the Future 2 first before the original.
yeah, I
So
just don't know that that's. I mean, I don't know the kids are even watching movies these days, but I would especially guess they're not watching the second movies before the first
well, speaking of
movies.
watching it on TV, let's bring up the point that I wanted to make at the beginning. I watched this on the TV AMC TV version because as of this recording, the day of this recording, it was on TV, and I was like, "Oh, great, we did it again." We scheduled this right when they're showing it on AMC, so I decided to watch it on AMC before we recorded. And it was fucking weird because it's an hour and 42-minute movie, and they put it in a 2.5 hour slot, and I'm just like, oh my god, this is gonna be a slog. So what I did was, after the first break, just hit pause, came back after half an hour, let everything just kind of catch up, and then forward through the commercials. So I pretty much got my 2 hours into the 2.5. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't too bad, but the quality, man, and I started to notice this. Like, I don't think like movies on AMC and all these like stations are like actually projecting HD quality streams when they should be. It's like they're taking a standard def, up-resing it, but not putting an HD touch to it, and it just looks like there's a lot of grain and it doesn't look clear. So if anything, it's convinced me that I need to get Ghostbusters 1 and 2 on 4K, which it's already on. I just have Ghostbusters 1 on Blu-ray, I guess. I thought I had the combo pack, but I guess I don't, but I have the Ghostbusters 1. So yeah, that's kind of why I was in that situation. I was gonna rent the stream, but then I was just like, it's on TV. What a coincidence. And then I realized I really need this on 4K because my goodness, like some of the quality on some of the scenes that I was watching was just not up to snuff. And I don't know if it was just like because I'm in a certain area and AMC's quality is not as great in my area. I don't know, but I think there needs to be a major overhaul on some of these older movies on TV nowadays because it's too grainy, and it's almost as if you're trying to get away with like a DVD screener on HD streaming for a channel, and you can't get away with that anymore. Like some of the Star Wars movies have been upgraded in quality. I've noticed whenever there's like a few minutes here and there on TV, I notice when I watch. Excuse me, but man, they need to really overhaul. And I think I noticed it too when Terminator 1, whenever that's on TV, I feel like that's not up to snuff either. For some reason, or whenever Terminator 2's on TV, quality's great for some reason, but when it's ever Terminator 1, which also came out in 84, I don't know, man. Just something about it. Like, I think we need an overhaul real bad in some of these.
I don't think James Cameron has remastered Terminator 1. I mean, I know he's remastered Terminator 2 a ton. I don't know that he's done the same thing with the first one. But I will say, I think that there is a difference in, like, because you will typically see Star Wars movies on the Disney owned channels now, and I think that makes a difference. AMC does not own the Ghostbusters, it's a Sony Columbia thing. So I wonder if that makes a difference in terms of like does ownership really matter with these with the situation? But for me, I think that there is a huge issue with the quality of these movies. I would agree with you, and we're going to be having a lot of discussions like this because there's digital versus physical media. Physical media feels like it's being put out to pasture by companies that are just purely interested in digital, and I don't know how that's necessarily going to work in total. I don't know that it's going to necessarily be good for anybody involved. But yeah, this. Aside from my thoughts on the movie, I would agree with you that if you are not presenting this movie in the highest quality, then you're just failing the audience in a big way.
And I speak from a perspective where like not a lot of there's still a percentage of people. I think the term is Luddites or something like that in terms of like the adopting technology scale. A lot of people still just watch movies on TV, and from that perspective, it's like they're getting really shit on, and it's like
I mean, the
you
problem
still
is
got these
that
spoiled people watching TV, and you're not getting high quality.
I'm going to guess it's older people, and they don't care about older people. Which I'm not agreeing with that, but I think that's why.
Yeah, and I gotta pay attention to this too because I notice whenever I'm watching like the Halloween movies, like some of them look really good, and then sometimes like the quality is a little off. And I guess it does depend on the station as well, and some stations have a stronger signal strength or whatever. But I don't know, it's just crazy that like my same TV can like show a football game and just be so amazing in HD, and then Ghostbusters 2 just looks like shit, and it's like, come on, like it should look good. You know what I'm saying? Like 89 is not that far off, and like the Batman 89 quality I think is much better when they put that on TV. So I don't know. I think I need to get the 4Ks of this and kind of just be like, oh, this is the quality that deserves to be shown for these movies. And despite how you feel about Ghostbusters 2, I think it's still like some of the matte paintings just look kind of off on TV, and some of the wide shots get a little grainy. So yeah, I think they really need to like, I don't know. You can't put 4K on TV for free, obviously, but do something because it's really a downgrade.
In a major way, for sure. But yeah, you are a fan of Ghostbusters too. You 7 out of 10. I'm at about a 5 out of 10. The gulf feels much greater, just because. I just think part of the issue is that I'm very just negative on the franchise in general, and I think that colors. I think it was just the two movies that might be a little bit more positive, but it just feels like I've been beaten down by four movies that I haven't really enjoyed that much. And again, to me, the first one is, I mean, it's in my 100 favorite movies of all time. I think that movie, in terms of a horror comedy, is one of the best that's ever been produced. And it's quite clear that we are never, ever going to be able to match that quality.
Yeah, my final thought on this is that there's always this criticism in the beginning of Ghostbusters 2 where it's like everyone forgets. And like, how did people forget that, they even said this in the 2021. How did people forget that there was a giant marshmallow walking around the city and this explosion happens at the top of this building with all these crazy lights? How did people forget that? Well, folks, we reelected Trump. That's all I got to say.
I mean that's not the issue. I think that if you want to do that plot line, like that is very realistic, but is it really the best thing for the movie though? Like that's the thing that I was thinking about. Like
I was thinking it's more realistic than I thought because when I watched this as a younger person, it's like, how do these people forget this?
Realism though, like, do we need the Ghostbusters to be realistic, or can we just have the Ghostbusters go on another adventure right from the start and not just have them split up?
That's the two ways to go about it. You start it this way or that way, and the latter seems to be the approachable thing for Ghostbusters movies, but not in the Avengers: Age of Ultron way.
I mean, the Avengers: Age of Ultron has a lot of problems, but the first 15 minutes of that movie are not the problem. That's probably the best part.
It's the best part of the movie, or them getting drunk. Can't forget that.
Yeah, I know. Big fan of that. All right. Brian, I'm going to let the trailer that you are going to edit into this podcast explain what we are going to be discussing next week.
Eyes Wide Shut, rated R.
All right, Brian. So next week we are discussing Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. I gave you Street Fighter. I gave you The Towering Inferno. It's my turn. This is my suggestion. Brian, things are going to get a little weird next week because not only are we discussing Eyes Wide Shut, but we are going to have two guests. I'm going to keep them a mystery, but we are going to have two guests on this podcast next week.
Yeah, Eyes Wide Shut, man. Listen, when it first came out and I watched it on pay-per-view when we got the black box, I was very confused because I had no idea what was going on. And you get older and you find out exactly what's going on. And as you get even older, you realize that Tom Cruise is a really immature dick in this movie because, come on, every woman has a fantasy. You can't hold them against them for it, right? And that's the whole point. But we'll get into that. So it's this sexual odyssey that Tom Cruise goes on. Everything is well shot. Everything is well done. But I don't know. I'm starting to feel like Stanley Kubrick might have been a troll towards the end of his career. We'll get into that discussion too, probably.
That is going to be a conversation that we will get into, and we have so much. It's going to be a long episode. It is going to be our first ever Christmas special. Hopefully, many more to come. But next week will be our first, the 25th anniversary of Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. That will be our discussion point next week on the Christmas special. This week, also go to our YouTube channel for a YouTube exclusive. We are going to be discussing Dinosaurs Refrigerator Day, a very exciting episode. So lots to come. Make sure that you click the bell icon for notifications. Make sure you like and subscribe. If you're on Apple and Spotify, give us a 4 or 5 star review to get those algorithms going. Any final thoughts, Brian, before we head on out of here?
I guess next week we're doing a bad thing.
Wow, I can't. Oh boy. So for Brian, I'm Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again on YouTube and next week.